continues to pour on the dirt until a final blackout is achieved. That means the pillbox is sealed.
There's a photograph of my grandmother's mother and her mother who has a headscarf on, but it might not have come with that group of photographs. It may have come, that's it. So the woman standing is the woman I think I look a lot like. That's my grandmother's mother, Mary Madison Chambers, and then her mother, who clearly was a slave because of, the time that she was born. So I think it's interesting to have all of that. I mean, I have documents that have been kept. My grandmother was the person that saved everything. My mother did not. My mother had some photo albums, but she just didn't collect things. I have laundry slips and receipts from furniture and all kinds of things I've been able to incorporate into collages, of my family, which has been fun. Francis and Paul went to Washington. They were afraid to go onto the property, but at the edge of the property with all of the for sale signs, because they were trying to sell the house at that point. What's interesting is that they were only trying to sell it for 200 and something thousand at that point. But I guess they couldn't sell it. And so they stayed in it. And now, of course, it's 1.3 million. But there was they photographed a little tiny house right at the edge of the property, and it was up on blocks, but there was like a little house, and that had to have been slave quarters.
In these machines, the parts move in under the X-ray tube, where a 1-ton lead hood comes down to cover them during exposure. Timing and intensity of the X-ray exposure are automatically controlled. In the finished films, the grain of the materials is examined. to determine the strength of the part and to find the slightest defect.
Well, my mom graduated from FAMC, they called it then. You know, it was Florida Agricultural and Mechanical College, and now it's FAMU. And she actually graduated during the Depression. She was there in the early 30s, and she majored in home economics and taught in various schools, high schools, public high schools, segregated high schools. When she got to Boston, she needed a job and applied for teaching in Boston public schools, and was rejected, was denied. And looking back, I don't know, and I'm assuming that there were so few people of color teaching in the public schools that was a major reason, but it may have been because she was married and they were very hesitant to hire women that they thought might become pregnant during their teaching responsibilities. So I don't know which it was. Barney did not earn enough money to support the family working at Simplex. So he had 2 other jobs. He was always in the reserves, the Army Reserves, and he also waited tables at a place called Southern House Hotel. And that was in Brookline, and it was a place that that celebrated bar mitzvahs and weddings, and he loved his work. He loved all of his work. He never complained. But nonetheless, my mother began ironing clothes for a woman named Mrs. Mannix. And she did that for a few years and then took the civil service exam and worked the rest of her life at Massachusetts Corporation of Taxation. And she was an assessing clerk. So she basically was always making out documents and filing documents having to do with businesses mostly and their taxes. So my mom never complained about that. She always ran to the bus, you know, hoping she wouldn't be late. And she always ran home wanting to serve dinner to the family. And she often prepared a lot of the meals on Sunday. But my high school teacher is Miss Glidden. And Miss Glidden, she was like another mom. And she was another mom, not just for me, but for any artists that she felt were going to go on to art school and they were going to develop their artwork. As a teacher, when I was teaching in the public schools, I was just the opposite. I nurtured the kids that didn't think that they had, you know, any sense of creativity. Kids that were very needy because of their home situations or what have you. The young people who were clearly going to go on to college or go on to a professional art school, I knew they were going to do it regardless of how they were nurtured by me. So in a way, I don't know, I guess I felt my strength in the public schools was almost as a social worker rather than a teacher, even though I won lots of awards as teaching, but it was about the kids. That one boy who had a pretty obvious disability was bullied, and I just told him, I said, you're just such an important person. You've got a gift, something to give, and you need to focus on what that is. And so the next time those kids bullied him, he just said, I know I am somebody. And he says, and my teacher told me I was, and now I know I am. You know? So he just stood up to them. And Yeah.
And when did you become Della-Piana?
Okay, so I went from, actually my numerology would be very interesting to try to trace it, if that has anything to do with personality. So I went from Kelly to Barnett, and I was probably maybe 6 years old. I can't remember the date on the adoption paper, but I do have it. And then in art school, I met Clarence Washington, and we married in December of 1959, and the marriage lasted less than a year. It was a non-marriage. I was pregnant with Danielle. Danielle was born in May of 1960, and she was born Danielle Gail Washington in Boston. And then I met Leandro Della-Piana. He's a sculptor. Clarence was a painter. And okay, so I met Leandro when I was probably 26.
It's 5 years in Boston
years
before
old,
going to
like
Salt
that.
Lake,
So
and then
it was,
12 years in Salt Lake. I think the difficulty there were all the rules, because I remember the new teachers were asked to stay, and the principal wanted to speak with us. This was my first year of teaching in school. And he said that that we were wearing our skirts too short. That if we were to bend over and touch our toes, that our skirts shouldn't rise up above our knees, on the back. And so I raised my hand and I said, well, I don't understand who's complained about this. He said, oh, parents were complaining that they didn't have the authority to get their kids to dress properly if the staff was not dressing properly. And I raised my hand again and I said, what are you going to do when you get the parents complain that I'm too black? And the new teachers were there. They just sort of drew in their breath. They couldn't believe I said that. And he never answered it. He just went on to the next, the Kellys, their property, they had a huge piece of property that faced Moncrief Avenue. And that used to be the country. Well, of course, it's now in the city limits. And the Black Cemetery is within walking distance. It's maybe a block and a half away. Very poorly kept, no perpetual care for that cemetery. But that is where my grandmother, Frances Watt, and that's where the Kellys are all buried. My grandmother had to be flown back from Boston to that cemetery because, of course, that's where her husband is buried, and that was her wish. So my mother, made sure that that happened. But it's very sad because the cemetery is in such terrible shape. But
I do want to stay near my family, but opportunities as they present themselves, I'm not going to turn them down. I'm looking to go to school in St. Louis right now, which is a big spot for the movement, and I feel I can definitely at least be a part of something there that I'm not getting here in Ohio necessarily. Definitely not in Oxford, Ohio. I'm some in Columbus, and it's still promising, but I want to put myself in a situation where I feel like I'm engaged with what's going on in the world and not, separated from it, hidden in a bubble. And that's, how I felt in Oxford for sure. Um, Anything that St. Louis has to offer, or any big city for that matter has to offer,
I still can't believe I'm 80,
definitely
how that happened.
willing to see where that
But
leads me.
the years they've been good, and there's so many people in my world that are important to me.